Here they come. A bunch of capybaras, a South American rodent species taking over an upscale neighborhood in Argentina.
For years, one of Argentina's greatest wetlands had a strange problem. It was overflowing with life, but missing the one animal that once kept that life in balance. Capybaras had taken over the swamp, vegetation was disappearing, and the entire ecosystem was slowly losing control. Then conservationists made a decision that sounded dangerous, even impossible: bring back the jaguar. Not everyone believed it would work. Releasing an apex predator into a landscape filled with people, cattle, and fragile wildlife could have gone terribly wrong. But years later, what happened inside that swamp shocked scientists, transformed local communities, and proved that sometimes the fastest way to heal nature is to return the fear that once kept it alive. The Iberá Wetlands, before the collapse. The Iberá Wetlands are the second largest wetland system in South America. For thousands of years, this place held a near-perfect food chain, with more than 4,000 species of plants and animals living in balance. At the top stood the jaguar, controlling herbivores and keeping the entire ecosystem stable. Then humans interfered. Between the 1930s and 1950s, commercial hunting and conflict with cattle ranchers completely eliminated jaguars from Argentina's Corrientes region. And once the apex predator disappeared, the consequences arrived fast. Herbivores began increasing explosively, and the most serious case was the capybara. The capybara explosion. Capybaras are native to the wetland, but without predators, their numbers surged. An adult can weigh between 35 and 70 kilograms and eat 3 to 4 kilograms of vegetation every day. On San Alonso Island, in the middle of Ibera, capybara density reached 129 individuals per square mile. At that level, hundreds of kilograms of aquatic plants vanished every day from small areas. Research showed that capybara grazing changed the structure of the grasslands. Plant biomass collapsed. Birds lost nesting sites. Insects lost shelter. Even soil surface temperatures changed. The wetland was being pushed toward ecological collapse. But this crisis was not solved by a government agency or a global scientific organization. It was interrupted by two people from outside the world of biology, and their actions triggered a media storm across South America. In the late 1990s, Doug Tompkins, co-founder of the North Face and Esprit, and his wife, Kris Tompkins, former CEO of Patagonia, made a shocking decision. They sold their shares, left the business world behind, and brought hundreds of millions of dollars to South America to buy private land. Their goal was to acquire badly degraded ecosystems and restore them. In Ibera alone, through their organization, they purchased around 395,000 acres of former cattle ranches. Across South America, they acquired more than 2 million acres. Suspicion exploded almost immediately. Argentine media and public opinion questioned why two wealthy Americans were buying so much land. They were not farming it, they were not mining it, they were not building luxury resorts. Locals accused them of trying to control freshwater sources or create a hidden foreign territory. Newspapers called it the private kingdom of the Americans. From private ranches to national park. But despite political pressure, the Tompkins continued restoring the land. After stabilizing around 160,000 hectares, they donated the area to the Argentine government, helping create today's Ibera National Park, a protected landscape covering 1.7 million acres. The land was safe now, but the ecosystem was still incomplete. The jaguar was missing. Bringing back such a predator was not as simple as releasing animals into the wild. It was a biological gamble that could easily become a social disaster. A jaguar can weigh more than 100 kilograms and hunt with lethal efficiency. Releasing it near thousands of cattle ranches carried enormous risk. Scientists had already seen how badly wildlife interventions could go wrong. On Macquarie Island, humans introduced cats to control rats, but the cats began killing rare birds. When the cats were removed, rabbits exploded in number and destroyed the vegetation, forcing scientists to use viruses to control them. That disaster proved one thing clearly: manipulating nature without caution can trigger collapse after collapse. So in Ibera, The Jaguar project began in 2010 with extreme care. In 2012, a massive pre-release center was built on San Alonso Island, isolated from humans, training jaguars to fear humans. Because only around 200 wild jaguars remained in Argentina, taking more from the local population would have increased the risk of inbreeding, so the team imported jaguars from rescue centers across South America. The center had one strict rule: no human interaction. The jaguars were not fed processed meat. They had to learn to hunt live wild boar and capybaras in a semi-wild environment. If any jaguar became too comfortable around people, it was immediately removed from the reintroduction program. The reason was simple. A jaguar that loses fear of humans may begin hunting livestock, and the entire ecological project could become a social revolt. Then patients finally produced results. In 2018, the first 2 jaguar cubs were born naturally in Ibera after almost 7 decades. And in 2021, the first jaguars officially crossed beyond the fences and entered the free wetland. The landscape of fear returns. That was when the ecological miracle began. Scientists call the mechanism a landscape of fear. Just as wolves reintroduced to Yellowstone in 1995 changed animal behavior and even affected river systems, jaguars in Ibera began reshaping the wetland, not mainly through killing, but through fear. GPS collar data and thousands of camera trap images revealed the change. As soon as jaguars appeared, capybaras began behaving differently. Before, they gathered by the dozens in open grasslands, eating for hours without interruption. After the jaguars returned, they moved more carefully. They avoided hunting areas. They sheltered near shrubs. They reduced grazing time. That fear created a top-down regulation effect. Grazing pressure dropped. Tall grasses returned. Roots gripped the soil again. Aquatic vegetation recovered. Grassland birds found nesting cover. Insects multiplied. Biodiversity began rising. Even the water filtered better because vegetation had returned. A few jaguars, simply by existing and restoring fear, reshaped tens of thousands of hectares. But just as the project began showing spectacular recovery, Ibera faced a disaster no one could predict, one that threatened to erase 30 years of work. The fire that nearly destroyed everything. At the beginning of 2022, Corrientes suffered an extreme climate event. Drought lasted for months. Temperatures reached record levels. Strong winds moved through the region. The Iberá Wetlands, normally soaked with humidity, dried out. Grass and dead vegetation became fuel. Then the fires began. Within weeks, flames burned more than 2.5 million acres, around 10% of the entire province. Inside Iberá National Park, nearly 60% of the surface was affected. Habitats that had only recently recovered were swallowed by fire. Fences, monitoring zones, and scientific equipment were damaged. Marsh deer, giant anteaters, water birds, and even jaguars were caught inside the danger zone. Rescue teams used boats and drones to track animals wearing GPS collars through the smoke and flames. Nature's recovery after disaster. The disaster raised a painful question for global conservation. Is it worth spending decades rebuilding an ecosystem if climate change can burn it down in days? But nature carries a powerful instinct for regeneration. After the fires, the jaguar population was not only preserved, it kept growing. Adult jaguars survived and protected their cubs. By 2026, the number of jaguars living completely free in Ibera had officially passed 50. That was a historic milestone. It meant Ibera now had a growing, self-sustaining jaguar population that no longer needed direct human control. The economic miracle of ecotourism and the biological success created an unexpected economic transformation. For years, towns around the wetland survived through small cattle ranching and illegal hunting. Young people often had to leave to find work. But the return of jaguars, giant anteaters, and giant otters changed everything. Iberá National Park became one of South America's fastest-growing ecotourism destinations. Time magazine selected it as one of the world's great places. Millions of dollars in tourism began reaching the region. A new economic truth appeared. A living jaguar could generate value for years by attracting tourists, far more than the worth of a few cattle it might accidentally hunt, turning former hunters into protectors. In South Africa, a leopard can generate more than $100,000 per year in tourism income for national parks. In Ibera, recent statistics show that average income in Colonia Carlos Pellegrini has increased several times since the project began. Even former hunters became part of the solution. People who once knew the wetland as hunting territory are now hired as safari guides and wildlife trackers. That was one of the smartest moves of the entire project, turning enemies into allies. When a hunter realizes that helping tourists photograph a jaguar brings more money and more respect than killing it, he becomes one of the forest's strongest protectors. So the question becomes, is the best way to conserve nature to make sure local communities benefit from that same nature? A global rewilding movement. Argentina's success is now part of a wider global movement. In India, efforts are underway to reintroduce cheetahs from Africa. In Europe, organizations are working to bring bison and wolves back to abandoned forests. These projects all share one belief: nature must be given back the power to regulate itself. The story of the jaguar and the capybara in Ibera is not only about saving one animal, it is about repairing a broken system. It shows that nature does not need humans to control every detail. It needs us to return the missing pieces. When humans take one step back, life often moves two steps forward. The restoration of the Iberá Wetlands proves that nature has an astonishing capacity to heal, as long as the lost links are restored. Releasing jaguars into a land dominated by capybaras was not a random experiment. It was proof that rebuilding the natural order can reverse some of the worst ecological damage. From suspicion over billionaires buying land, to the danger of releasing apex predators, to surviving a historic fire, Ibera has come back to life. But climate change and human pressure remain real challenges. We have seen how the jaguar changed an entire wetland. So which animal in your country needs the most protection to save the habitat around it? And are we willing to accept the risk of living beside apex predators for a more sustainable future? Leave your opinion in the comments. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next mysteries and shocking events of nature. Thank you for watching.